The morning light over Portsmouth was thin and clean, the kind that made the glass doors of the primary care clinic look brighter than they were. Eleanor Whitaker sat on a molded chair with a paper clipboard in her lap, listening to the soft coughs and the rattle of a printer behind the reception desk. Her phone buzzed. Angela's name filled the screen. She smiled without thinking and answered in a whisper meant for quiet rooms. "Hi, sweetheart." The voice that came back was cool, efficient, a tone Angela reserved for scheduling and invoices. "Mom, we're flying to Europe tomorrow. I already sold the beach house and the car. We needed the cash. You'll be fine. I'll call when I land." There was a click, a void, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, reclaiming the space where a daughter's warmth should have been. For a second, Eleanor thought she had misheard. The beach house. York Beach. The summers salted into the wood of its porch, the birthdays, the Christmases smuggled north just to see the ocean under snow. And the car, Robert's old sedan he had polished every Sunday like a quiet ritual. The wool blanket folded in the trunk because New England weather never promised kindness. It wasn't a collection of things. It was a map of their life. Her pulse climbed, then broke, then settled into a flat, odd quiet. The nurse called her name. Eleanor stood, nodded, walked into the exam room, and answered the doctor's gentle questions with practiced steadiness. Blood pressure, sleep, appetite. "You're doing well for your age," he said. "Rest, eat, keep walking." She nodded again, because that was the easiest thing to do when a person believed he had helped you. Outside, the air smelled faintly of ocean and coffee. She held the phone in both hands, as if it were heavy. Angela had not asked. Angela had told her, the way a stranger might tell a hotel clerk that the room would be vacated by noon. The word sold kept repeating, dull and absolute. Sold the house where Angela learned to swim. Sold the car that still held a trace of Robert's aftershave in the upholstery. Sold, as if memory were a piece of furniture that could be carried down a set of narrow stairs and strapped to a truck. On the bus home, Eleanor took the seat by the window and watched the town move past. Red brick buildings, a bakery with a chalkboard sign, a boy tugging a Labrador across the crosswalk. She breathed until her hands stopped shaking. In the quiet rhythm of the engine, she found the edge of a memory, not of the house or the car, but of Robert at the kitchen table 6 months earlier, the morning before his last morning. He had poured coffee, slid a plate of toast toward her, then placed a sealed envelope beside the butter. "Keep this in your dresser," he had said, those gray eyes kind. "Open it when you're ready, not before." She had tucked it away because the day was ordinary, and ordinary days make promises we're foolish enough to believe. Then death came like a door slamming in a wind you never felt coming. An envelope drifted to the back of a drawer behind scarves and old gloves. She found it again now in her mind, as clearly as if she had just watched him set it down. By the time she stepped off the bus and walked the 2 blocks to her house, the resolve had formed. She would open it tonight. Not because Angela had taken what did not belong to her, not because loss demanded a witness, but because something in Robert's face that morning had asked to be trusted. Evening lowered itself gently over Portsmouth. Eleanor made tea. She did not drink, then went to the bedroom and pulled open the top drawer of the dresser, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar. The envelope lay exactly where she had left it, cream paper softened by time, her name written in Robert's careful hand. She sat on the edge of the bed and held it until the house seemed to quiet around her. Pipes settling, a gull crying far off, the lamp ticking faintly with its own heat. Then she slid it open with a fingernail. There were documents, deeds with crisp seals, statements with numbers that made no emotional sense, certificates from companies whose names meant little to her. And a letter. "My Eleanor," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to make your coffee in the morning. Forgive me for not telling you everything. I didn't want worry to live at our table. Over the years, I put what we had into places that could grow. Not just the beach house. There are 6 properties. There are stakes in 3 companies. There is money enough for your years to be gentle. It is all held through Whitaker Harbor LLC. You are the sole beneficiary. Please keep this quiet, especially from Angela. I needed our daughter to love us for who we were, not for what we owned. Her breath left her in a long, steady measure. She read the letter twice, then a third time, the words settling into her like a tide filling a familiar cove. 6 properties, 3 companies, a holding company with a name like a private smile. Robert, who had driven a bus and saved receipts and mended the screen door himself, had built a harbor she had never seen. She placed the letter on her lap and looked at the tidy stacks of proof. Angela had sold what she believed was everything, and done it with the practiced indifference of someone ordering a rideshare. But this was the rest of the story Angela never bothered to ask about. Robert had kept the secret, so their daughter would not bend herself around money. The cruel symmetry was impossible to ignore. Believing her mother had nothing, Angela had thrown her away. Eleanor folded the letter back into the envelope and slid it under the stack of deeds, her hand steady at last. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Inside, she sat very still, listening to the house breathe, and felt something quiet and unbreakable take root. 2 days later, Eleanor's phone rang again. Angela's voice, once again businesslike, floated through the receiver. "Mom, I sent you 30% of what we made from the sale. It's in your account. You can use it to find a small apartment when we're back. Europe's going to be amazing. Eric's planned everything." Then came the light laugh Eleanor used to love and now could barely recognize. "We'll call from Paris." The line went dead before Eleanor could reply. 30% of her own home, of her husband's car, of her life. The corners of Eleanor's mouth twitched into a bitter smile. Angela thought she was being generous, thought her mother was helpless, destitute, unable to function without her guidance. It was almost comical, if it hadn't been so profoundly sad. At Portsmouth International, Eleanor stood at a distance, a figure half hidden behind the slow procession of travelers and luggage carts. Angela and Eric were at the gate, laughing, touching each other's hands, lost in the glow of their own adventure. They didn't look back. Not once. Not even a glance over the shoulder. For years, Eleanor had been the one to hold their world together. Birthday parties, holidays, dinners, care packages during lean times. And now, in a single phone call, she had been reduced to a line item on Angela's to-do list, a problem to be managed and forgotten. She drove home in silence. The old house creaked the way it always had, the radiator hissing gently in the hallway, the scent of lemon polish lingering from yesterday's dusting. On the table lay the documents Robert had left her, their weight both a comfort and a challenge. It would be easy, she thought, to storm into court, to make noise and demand apologies. It would be satisfying to call Angela and let rage burn through every word. But that wasn't Robert's way, and she realized it wasn't hers either. Justice didn't have to shout. Sometimes the most devastating blow was delivered without a raised voice. The next morning, Eleanor dressed with quiet precision. Navy blazer, sensible flats, the string of pearls Robert had given her on their 25th anniversary. She took a bus into the center of Portsmouth, where the law offices of McAllister and Hayes occupied the second floor of a sandstone building overlooking Market Square. Jonas McAllister had known Robert for decades, first as a neighbor and later as the attorney who helped structure the investments Robert had so carefully hidden. When Eleanor entered his office, Jonas rose from behind his desk and offered a gentle smile. "It's been too long," he said, gesturing for her to sit. She placed the manila folder on his desk and unfolded the story, Angela's call, the sale of the house and the car, the 30% gift. Jonas listened without interrupting, his brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When she finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "Eleanor," he said finally, Angela didn't have the legal authority to sell either property. "The house is owned by Whitaker Harbor LLC. Your name is the sole signatory on record. Any transaction without your consent is invalid. He tapped the folder lightly. We can undo this. A strange calm settled over Eleanor, the kind that follows a long storm. Then let's begin, she said, quietly. I don't want her to know anything until it's done. Jonas nodded. I'll handle it discreetly. The fewer people involved, the better. And so, the wheels began to turn, not with headlines or shouting matches, but with certified letters and filings in the county clerk's office. Weeks passed. Eleanor kept to her routines. She walked to the market on Tuesdays, visited the library on Thursdays, and watered the hydrangeas in the front yard every Saturday morning. Neighbors waved from across the street, their eyes soft with pity. Such a shame, one whispered within earshot. Her daughter left her with nothing. She's too proud to ask for help, another said. Eleanor only smiled faintly and nodded. Let them think what they wanted. Behind closed doors, however, the truth was shifting. Jonas filed motions to rescind the unauthorized sale. The bank began reviewing the forged documents Eric had presented when he tried to leverage the property. And step by careful step, the life Angela believed she had stripped away from her mother was sliding back into Eleanor's hands. At night, Eleanor would sit by the window, the lights of Portsmouth flickering softly beyond the glass. She thought of Robert and the quiet certainty with which he had built this hidden future. She thought of Angela, of the little girl who once held her hand crossing the street and the woman who now saw her as an obstacle. And she thought of justice not as vengeance, but as balance restored. The world saw a frail widow, abandoned and forgotten. But beneath that still surface, a plan, measured, deliberate, unstoppable, was already in motion. By early spring, the tide had begun to turn. The paperwork Jonas filed wound its way through the county offices, and within weeks the fraudulent sale had been annulled. The York Beach house, with its white shutters and weathered cedar siding, was once again under Eleanor's name, exactly where it had always belonged. Angela's signatures were ruled invalid, and the buyers, faced with legal action, withdrew quietly, their attorneys eager to settle rather than face a public lawsuit. Eleanor stood on the front porch one gray morning, the salty wind tangling her hair, and felt something she hadn't felt since Robert died, control. But Jonas's work had uncovered more than just the illegitimacy of the sale. Sitting across from her in his office one afternoon, he slid a file toward her, the pages dense with numbers and liens. Eric, Jonas said, adjusting his glasses, is drowning in debt. He's leveraged almost everything he can get his hands on, including, he paused, the condominium he and Angela live in. Eleanor frowned. But that's not his property. Jonas nodded. Exactly. It's in Angela's name. And she co-signed the refinancing papers he submitted to the bank. He's been using that condo as collateral for multiple personal loans. Technically, they're in default. Eleanor exhaled slowly, a mix of anger and grim inevitability tightening in her chest. It wasn't enough that they had sold her home. Eric had gambled with property he didn't even own. Can we intervene? She asked. Jonas nodded again. We can, and we should. You have legal standing to evict anyone occupying the property without proper authorization. That includes Angela. There was no hesitation in Eleanor's voice. Do it. Send the notice. The eviction paperwork was filed the following Monday. 3 days later, Angela's world cracked. The call came just after dusk, the phone vibrating across the kitchen table, where Eleanor was slicing an apple. Mom. Angela's voice trembled, stripped of the brisk certainty it had carried weeks before. I got a letter. It says I'm being evicted. What's happening? Eleanor kept her tone even. It means the condo isn't legally yours to occupy. You signed documents you shouldn't have. Angela's breath hitched audibly. It's Eric. He did it. He took out loans in my name. And now he's gone. There was a long silence on the line before the words tumbled out in broken pieces. Eric had disappeared. Left for Paris, she said, with a woman Angela had never heard of, draining their joint account before boarding the plane. The creditors were circling. The phone calls wouldn't stop. Angela was terrified. "Mom, please," she whispered. "I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do." Eleanor let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the daughter who, only weeks before, had sold her home and called it generosity. The daughter who had seen her as a burden to be managed. And now here she was, her voice small and unsteady, reaching for the mother she had cast aside. It would have been easy to lash out, to remind her of every cruel word and careless choice. But that was not the lesson Eleanor wanted to teach. "Angela," she said gently, "you can come home. If you need somewhere to stay, the door is open." There was a pause, then a sob of relief on the other end of the line. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you. I'll be there tomorrow." When the call ended, Eleanor remained seated at the table, the apple slices untouched before her. Outside, the lamplight caught on the budding branches of the maple tree, the faintest hint of spring breaking through the winter gray. She thought of Robert again, how deliberate he had been in every decision, how he had believed that lessons learned the hard way were the ones that endured. Perhaps this was her turn to do the same. By the time Angela arrived 2 days later, the confident veneer she had always worn was gone. She stepped through the door with 2 suitcases and eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Eleanor embraced her lightly, steady but distant, and guided her inside. "You're safe now," she said. "We'll figure things out." But in the quiet corners of her mind, Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. Offering shelter wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was the first step in something larger, something Robert would have approved of, a lesson delivered not with anger, but with consequence. Her daughter was back under her roof, not as the triumphant woman who had once dismissed her, but as someone humbled, fragile, and ready, perhaps for the first time, to learn. Angela returned on a wet Thursday afternoon with nothing but 2 worn suitcases and a tote bag that sagged under its own weight. The expensive clothes and polished shoes she had once flaunted were gone, replaced by a plain coat and sneakers that looked a size too big. The woman who stepped through Eleanor's doorway was not the same one who had left laughing on her way to the airport. Her shoulders curled inward, her eyes avoided mirrors, and her voice was quieter now, hesitant, uncertain. "This is all I have left," she said, setting the bags by the stairs. Eleanor simply nodded. "Then it's enough." The first days were strange, like living with a ghost of someone she used to know. Angela kept to the guest room, venturing out only for coffee or a quick meal. One morning, while sorting through an old chest of drawers, she found a small cream-colored envelope tucked between 2 photo albums. The handwriting on the front stopped her breath. Robert Whittaker. "Mom," she called softly, stepping into the kitchen. "I think this is from Dad." Eleanor dried her hands on a dish towel, her heart thudding. She had forgotten that Robert had left more than one letter. Inside the envelope was a single key and a short note in Robert's handwriting. "For when you truly need it, Bank of New England, Safe Deposit Box 143. The next day, Eleanor and Angela took the bus downtown, the drizzle turning Market Street into a sheen of reflected light. At the bank, a clerk led them into a small private room and placed a narrow metal box on the table. Inside, wrapped carefully in velvet pouches and soft cloth, lay a collection of jewelry Eleanor hadn't seen in decades. A pearl choker Robert had inherited from his grandmother, a diamond brooch once worn to Eleanor's sister's wedding, a gold watch engraved on their 20th anniversary. Piece by piece, Angela lifted them into the light, each one glittering with history. "They're beautiful," Angela whispered, awe and regret braided into her voice. "They're worth a lot," Eleanor said softly. The bank's appraiser estimated the collection at roughly $200,000. Angela stared at the number, silent for a long time before finally speaking. "We could sell them," she said carefully. "It would pay off the loans Eric took." It might even get the collectors to back off. Eleanor sipped her tea and said nothing. She neither encouraged nor dissuaded her daughter. Instead, she watched her wrestle with the weight of a choice, whether to erase Eric's mistakes with a final gift from the past or to let him face the consequences he had sown. A few days later, Jonas called with more information. Eric's debts were worse than they had known. Over $200,000 spread across multiple creditors. But the most damning revelation came at the end of the report. Angela isn't legally responsible for most of it, Jonas explained. We found forged signatures on several documents. Eric falsified her consent. If we pursue this, we can build a strong case to clear her name. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. Do it, she said quietly. File the suit, but she doesn't need to know about it yet. Jonas hesitated. You're sure? I am, she replied. She needs to face where her choices have brought her. When the time is right, she'll learn the rest. And so, while Jonas prepared legal action against Eric in silence, Angela tried to rebuild her life piece by piece. With the condo gone and her savings drained, she had little choice but to work. She found a part-time job cleaning office buildings downtown, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., 5 nights a week. The first night she returned, exhausted and smelling faintly of disinfectant. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen and said almost apologetically, I didn't know cleaning floors could make your back ache like this. Eleanor offered her a cup of tea. Work has a way of humbling us, she said gently. The contrast was staggering. Months earlier, Angela had sipped champagne in airport lounges and boasted about her next trip abroad. Now, she scrubbed coffee stains from conference room carpets under fluorescent lights. Yet, as the weeks passed, something shifted. Her hands, once manicured and idle, grew strong and steady. Her eyes, once quick to judge, softened when she spoke to the janitors she worked alongside. She learned the names of their children, listened to their stories, shared her own without shame. Rock bottom, she realized, wasn't just a place, it was a mirror, and in its reflection, she was beginning to see herself clearly for the first time in years. Through it all, Eleanor said little. She cooked, she listened, she offered quiet company. But every night, when the house was still and Angela was asleep, she would sit by the window with Jonas's updates in her lap. The plan was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. Angela was learning, not through lectures or punishments, but through the slow, steady gravity of consequence. And somewhere deep in Eleanor's chest, where grief and anger had once knotted together, something like hope began to grow. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Angela had ever lived through. Gone were the impulsive purchases and glossy credit cards that once seemed endless. Every dollar now had a name, a purpose, and a weight. She learned to plan her meals around what was on sale, to stretch a paycheck into a month, to patch and mend rather than replace. Even the smallest victories, a bill paid on time, a loan reduced by $20 after a long phone call, felt monumental. Humiliation had taught her discipline. Desperation had taught her value. One afternoon, after finishing a night shift and napping for a few hours, Angela met with a representative from one of Eric's creditors. The man was blunt, unsympathetic, but she stood her ground, presenting her meager budget and proposing a revised payment plan. I can't give you what I don't have, she said, her voice trembling but firm. But I can give you this much every month. And I will. The man sighed, glanced at the paperwork, and nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was progress. And for Angela, that was enough. At the office building where she worked nights, she began talking with Rosa, a middle-aged cleaner from El Salvador who hummed while she mopped. Rosa had 3 children and sent half her paycheck back home every month. One night, during a break in the break room, Rosa handed Angela a thermos of homemade soup and asked, gently, You were rich before, weren't you? Angela laughed weakly. I thought I was. Rosa smiled. Money is nothing if it disappears. Character is what you keep when everything else is gone. Those words lodged deep in Angela's chest, heavier than any debt. That night, she cried quietly on the bus ride home. The reflection in the window, tired eyes, work-worn hands, wasn't the woman she used to be, but it was the woman she had made herself into. And for the first time in years, she didn't flinch from the image. The dam finally broke one evening in the kitchen. Eleanor was stirring soup when she heard a soft sob behind her. Angela stood by the counter, shoulders shaking, hands clutching the edge like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I ruined everything," she whispered. "I sold your house, Dad's car, all those memories, and I left you alone because I thought you had nothing to offer me anymore." Eleanor turned off the stove and wiped her hands before taking her daughter into her arms. "Oh, Angela," she murmured, "you are not the first person to lose herself. What matters is whether you find your way back." The next morning brought news from Jonas. "We've located Eric," he said over the phone. "He's in Paris, trying to marry a French citizen to stay in the country. And we've confirmed he forged Angela's signature on several loan documents." Eleanor's breath caught. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. We have enough evidence to absolve her of nearly all the debt. It will take time, but it's solid." Eleanor stared out the window after the call, watching the rain bead and slide down the glass. A part of her wanted to rush upstairs, burst into Angela's room, and tell her everything, that she was free, that Eric's betrayal could no longer touch her. But something in her resisted. Angela's journey wasn't finished yet. The lesson hadn't yet woven itself fully into the fabric of her heart. If she learned too soon that salvation was coming, she might never understand how much strength she had found on her own. So Eleanor kept the news to herself. She folded Jonas's notes neatly and tucked them into a drawer beside Robert's letter. She prepared dinner as usual, asked Angela about her day, listened as her daughter spoke about saving up for a used car, about maybe taking class at the community college. Angela's voice was still tinged with guilt, but beneath it was something new, resolve. That night, Angela wrote a letter to herself before bed. "I will never forget this. I will never treat love like it's something I'm owed. I will build my life with my own hands, one small piece at a time." She folded it and placed it under her pillow, as if to keep the promise close. And as the house fell into silence, Eleanor stood in the doorway of her own room, the city lights flickering faintly beyond the curtains. The path ahead was still long, but she knew the hardest part was behind them. Angela was changing, not because of money or fear or even forgiveness, but because the lesson had begun to take root. And Eleanor, though she said nothing, allowed it to grow. The invitation came without warning. One Tuesday morning, as Angela finished her second cup of coffee before heading to the office cleaning job, Eleanor appeared in the doorway with her coat already on. "Put on something warm," she said gently. "We're going out." "Where?" Angela asked, startled by the sudden plan. "You'll see," Eleanor replied, offering nothing more. They rode the bus downtown in silence, the early spring wind rattling the windows as they passed the familiar streets of Portsmouth. Angela stared out at the gray sky and tried to guess where they were going. A grocery store, maybe, or the library. When the bus stopped in front of a sandstone building with brass lettering that read McAllister and Hayes, attorneys at law, her heart gave a nervous lurch. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Just come with me," Eleanor said, her tone calm but unreadable. Jonas rose from behind his mahogany desk as they entered, greeting Eleanor warmly before turning to Angela with a polite nod. "It's good to finally meet you," he said. Angela's confusion deepened. "Finally." "Have a seat," Jonas said, gesturing to two chairs across from him. He opened a thick folder and slid several documents across the desk. "Angela, what you're about to see will answer a lot of questions." Angela picked up the first set of papers. They were court filings, affidavits, and financial statements, each stamped and signed. Her name appeared repeatedly, but not as a debtor. Instead, She was listed as a victim of financial fraud. Jonas spoke steadily as she flipped through the pages. We've confirmed that Eric forged your signature on multiple loan agreements. He falsified consent forms and misrepresented property ownership. Based on the evidence we've gathered, you're not legally responsible for any of the debts associated with those loans. Angela's breath caught. I'm not responsible. No, Jonas said with a small smile. Once the court finalizes the ruling, which it will, given the strength of the case, your liability will be wiped out entirely. She set the papers down, hands trembling. But who filed all this? Who paid for it? Jonas's eyes flickered briefly to Eleanor before he answered. Your mother did. Angela turned slowly toward Eleanor, her mouth parting as if words might fall out, but none did. You? Eleanor nodded once. I hired Jonas months ago, right after you sold the house. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. You knew. Angela whispered. You knew about all of this? I did, Eleanor said quietly. I knew about the debts, about Eric's lies, about everything. Then why? Angela's voice broke into a sob. Why did you let me go through all of this, working nights, drowning in shame, when you could have stopped it? Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and kind. Because, Angela, there are some lessons that can't be taught. They can only be lived. If I had swooped in and solved everything the moment it fell apart, you would have walked away unchanged. You would have thought money fixes everything. And that's not true. Tears blurred Angela's vision, but I was so lost. And yet here you are, Eleanor said softly. You faced the people you owed. You negotiated payments. You earned every dollar with your own two hands. You learned humility, strength, and the weight of responsibility. That's something no check could have given you. Angela covered her face with both hands, her body shaking. I betrayed you, she whispered through the tears. I sold the home you loved. I sold Dad's car. I threw you away because I thought you had nothing left to give me. Eleanor reached across the desk and gently took her daughter's hands. You betrayed neither me nor your father. You lost your way, but people find their way back. That's what families do. The room fell silent except for Angela's quiet sobs. When she finally looked up, Eleanor was still watching her with the same patient eyes she remembered from childhood, the eyes of a woman who had always been there, even when she didn't deserve it. There's something else you should know, Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. The beach house, the accounts, the shares, everything Robert built, everything he left behind, it's still ours. He put it in a company called Whitaker Harbor LLC, and I've been the sole beneficiary since the day he died. I never lost it. You didn't sell it. You couldn't. Angela's mouth fell open. So, all this time, Eleanor said, nodding. I've known. I just needed you to learn what's truly valuable before you knew it too. Angela stared down at the papers again, but their meaning had changed. They were no longer just legal documents. They were proof that her mother had been fighting for her all along, not to save her from consequences, but to save her from herself. In that quiet office, Angela understood something profound. Eleanor had not rescued her with money. She had rescued her by forcing her to face her own reflection, by showing her that strength and redemption were born not from wealth, but from the will to rebuild. And for the first time in years, Angela felt something deeper than relief. She felt respect. Spring in Portsmouth unfurled slowly, the damp chill of March giving way to pale sunlight and budding maples. Life inside Eleanor's house began to shift too, not with dramatic changes, but with the quiet, deliberate steps that mark real transformation. Angela still rose each evening and put on her cleaning uniform, still rode the bus downtown to scrub conference tables and empty trash bins. But something fundamental had changed. She no longer did it out of desperation. Now, she did it to honor the journey that had reshaped her. I'm not done learning yet, she told Eleanor one evening as she laced up her shoes. I want to see this through. At work, Angela started noticing more than just the stains on the floors or the hum of the vacuum. She noticed the people around her, the weary smiles, the quiet resilience. Rosa, who worked 2 jobs and still sent money home to her parents. Malik, who was saving every penny to bring his wife and son from Morocco. Angela found herself staying late to help Rosa finish her section, or swapping shifts so Malik could attend his ESL class. "You don't have to do that," Rosa would say, but Angela would smile and reply, "I want to." In those moments, she felt something money had never given her: purpose. At home, Angela insisted on contributing to the household. The first time she placed an envelope of cash on the kitchen table, Eleanor stared at it as if it were a foreign object. "It's for utilities," Angela explained, "and groceries. I live here too." Eleanor's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. The gesture spoke louder than any apology could have. Angela was no longer a dependent. She was a partner. With newfound clarity about what mattered, Angela began thinking beyond her own redemption. One night, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and an open laptop. "I've been looking at programs," she said when Eleanor walked in. "Social work, community outreach. I want to help women who've been through what I have. Women who think they've ruined their lives and don't know where to start again." Eleanor placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, pride swelling quietly in her chest. "That," she said, "sounds like the kind of work that changes the world." The following week, Angela submitted her application to the University of New Hampshire's social work program. She wrote her personal statement late into the night, each word a reflection of the person she was becoming. "I once believed that money could solve anything. I was wrong. What changes lives is compassion, responsibility, and the courage to start over. I want to be part of that change." One rainy afternoon, Jonas stopped by the house with an update. "Eric's been arrested," he told them. "He was caught attempting a fraudulent marriage in Paris. French authorities plan to deport him back to the US, where he'll face charges for identity theft and forgery." Angela listened quietly, stirring sugar into her tea. A few months earlier, the news would have consumed her. Rage, humiliation, maybe even a flicker of vindictive satisfaction. Now she felt nothing. "I hope he figures his life out," she said simply, "but he's not my problem anymore." That night, as they cleared the dinner table, Angela paused by the window, watching rain streak the glass. "You know," she said softly, "if Eric hadn't betrayed me, I don't think I'd ever have learned to value what I had. I'd still be chasing things that don't matter." Eleanor, stacking plates by the sink, looked over her shoulder and smiled. "Life has strange ways of teaching us," she said. "The trick is being willing to learn." Angela nodded, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. The road back had been long and jagged, lined with shame, labor, and tears. But it had also given her something she had never possessed before: a deep, unshakable sense of who she was. She was no longer the woman who measured worth by the square footage of a house or the brand of a handbag. She was someone who understood that money was a tool, not a goal, that family was a choice renewed every day, and that strength was forged in the fires of failure. As she prepared for another night of work, Angela slipped her acceptance letter, still fresh from the printer, into her bag. Tomorrow she would mail it. Tomorrow, another chapter would begin. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't frighten her. It felt like a promise. 6 months later, the rhythms of life in Portsmouth bore little resemblance to the hollow, fragile days that had once defined Eleanor and Angela's relationship. The wounds between them, though deep, had healed not with grand gestures, but through countless small acts, shared meals, quiet conversations, and the steady rebuilding of trust. What had begun as a painful reckoning had grown into something far more beautiful: a partnership between 2 women who had finally learned how to see one another clearly. Angela's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. She had not only completed her social work certificate program, but had excelled in it, graduating near the top of her class. At the ceremony, Eleanor sat in the front row, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as her daughter crossed the stage. When Angela turned to wave, the auditorium lights caught the small, proud smile she wore, one that spoke of a hard-won peace. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from Boston University. Angela had been accepted into their master's program in sociology, with a focus on social policy and women's empowerment. She held the envelope in trembling hands, laughing and crying at the same time. "I didn't think I'd ever get here," she whispered, "but I did." Eleanor, too, had found new purpose. Inspired by Angela's journey and the stories of countless women who had faced similar betrayals, she founded the Whitaker Women's Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women recovering from financial abuse and abandonment. With the assets Robert had left behind, properties, investments, and a sizable trust, she built programs that offered emergency housing, legal aid, and financial literacy training. On the day the foundation opened its doors, Eleanor placed a framed photo of Robert on her desk and whispered, "We're still building together, love, just in a different way." Life in the Whitaker household settled into a new, intentional balance. One evening, as they prepared dinner side by side, Angela turned to her mother with a seriousness Eleanor hadn't seen before. "I want to keep living here," she said, "but not because I need to. I want to because this is home, and because I want to share life with you as equals." Eleanor paused, the knife hovering over the cutting board. "As equals," she repeated with a small smile. "Yes," Angela nodded. "I'll contribute to the bills, the upkeep, everything. I don't want to ever take your love for granted again." Eleanor reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You never needed to earn my love," she said softly, "but I'm proud of the woman you've become." And Angela had become a woman her mother could be proud of, one who understood the value of both independence and connection, who had learned that strength and vulnerability could coexist. On weekends, she volunteered at shelters, listening to stories that mirrored her own and helping women navigate the maze of legal and financial recovery. She shared her mistakes openly, not as confessions, but as tools for others to climb out of their own despair. "You're not broken," she would tell them. "You're just beginning." One crisp autumn afternoon, the two women drove north to York Beach, to the weathered house that had once been the heart of their family. Its cedar shingles had been freshly restored, the porch railings painted white again, but the spirit of the place was unchanged. Eleanor settled into her favorite rocking chair by the large bay window, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. Outside, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, its tides whispering against the shore. Angela joined her, sitting on the floor with papers spread around, course syllabi, nonprofit brochures, a half-finished grant proposal. It was ordinary and it was everything. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Angela asked, glancing up from her notes. "Every day," Eleanor replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We lost so much, and yet we gained something far greater." Angela nodded, her smile soft. "You didn't just fight for justice, Mom. You fought for me." Eleanor didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a long breath, the salt air filling her lungs, and let her eyes linger on the waves rolling gently toward shore. There had been a time when she believed justice meant reclaiming what was stolen, her home, her dignity, her peace. But now she understood that the greatest victory was not measured in property deeds or court rulings. It was sitting beside her now, scribbling notes and dreaming of the future. The story of betrayal and heartbreak had become one of growth and grace. Eleanor had not only won back her life, she had won back her daughter's heart. And as the evening sun dipped low over York Beach, casting the sky in hues of gold and rose, she felt an unshakable sense of peace. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had returned home.